The White House wants to move on, but as Jonathan points out, the American public isn't quite ready. A majority of Americans say they are concerned their states will begin lifting stay-at-home restrictions too soon. According to a new Monmouth University poll, 63% of Americans say states are moving to reopen too quickly during the coronavirus pandemic. 29% say states are not moving quickly enough. 56% say preventing more people from getting sick should be the more important factor in lifting restrictions, while 33% say it should be preventing an economic downturn. 49% of independents, 80% of Democrats say health concerns should be the presiding factor in deciding when to reopen. 54% of Republicans say the economy should matter more. And a majority of Americans say they do not support states opening some businesses, according to a new Washington Post University of Maryland poll that we first told you about yesterday. Here are those numbers. 82% say movie theaters should not reopen. 78% say gyms should remain closed. 74% believe nail salons and dine-in restaurants should not open their doors. 70% want gun stores to remain closed. And 69% say that barbershops and hair salons should not reopen. So, Dr. Emanuel, you have there evidence from the American people, again, not just Democrats, not just progressives, but Americans, that they are concerned that going back too quickly means that more people will get sick. There are obviously everything that's in the background is about the economy. The terrible unemployment numbers, we'll get another one tomorrow around this time. You have the economic growth slowing. The second quarter numbers will be terrible. Everyone knows that. Everyone wants to get back to work. But it appears, even if the president isn't, the American people are listening to the doctors on this.
Yeah, it is remarkable. And again, a lot of studies have shown that the American people began physical distancing, began staying at home well before the shelter-in-place orders were put in place in most states. And even in states that didn't put them in place, Americans began physical distancing, began reducing their travel and interaction with people. So the American public has been listening to this and responding. I would note that the opening of things like hair salons, barbershops, gyms, goes against the president's own opening plan. Phase one does not include opening those kind of facilities, and yet we can see in Texas with Governor Abbott and other places that they're rushing to open the kind of businesses that even the president's own plan says should be open later, only after you have a decline. And by the way, that plan has certain metrics. One of the most important metrics is you have to have a decline in the number of cases for 14 days. And that's clearly wasn't the case in Georgia, not the case in Texas. And around the country in most places is not going to be the case. So we have this disconnect between what public health requires and the economy. And I would say to those governors and the president who keep saying we've got to reopen the economy, you can reopen businesses, but unless you have demand, unless customers are coming, unless the American public is willing to shop, you're not going to have much economic activity, and you're going to compromise the public health benefits of keeping people at home and physical distancing just with a few people going out. That contradiction is going to make it harder to recover and make it much more likely we're going to have a second very severe wave coming either at the end of the summer or in the fall. And I think that's what public health officials are worried about.
Wow. Zeke Emanuel, thank you very much. A fundamental problem focused purely on the leadership over this. Thank you, Zeke. And still ahead on Morning Joe, the mayor of New York City, Bill de Blasio, is our guest. But first, Wall Street rallies even as the death toll mounts. Is the White House focused on one over the other? NBC's Stephanie Ruhle joins us next with more on that. Plus, NBC's Julia Ainsley with her new reporting on law enforcement officials in the U.S. and the U.K. concerned of malicious cyber campaigns that are targeting hospitals and medical institutions. We'll be right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.